Since we have a state representative, I'll pick on him. The state said that's compliant. And I said, based on what? You want to tell them what it's based on?
It was based on my supervisor's decision. But as I recall, this was not a the caveat was that this was not part of a required exit.
Well, it actually was the second required exit, not the primary. The primary was obviously inside the house. And that was the whole fight, because the county and the local building inspector said, no, you gotta have a landing. They were overruled, so that happens. Another thing that changed, instead of having the traditional guardrail, whether we're talking a patio, a porch, a deck, there were new things that came into being that said, if we have a guarded side, and when do we need a guardrail in the first place?
Over 24 inches.
More than 24 inches above grade. They said, well, we can use a combination of things. We can use benches, we can use planters, as long as it's not easily accessible. So, some new things there. And of course, I like to play the devil's advocate, and I sent this one in and I said, compliant or not. And I don't mean the one with the wood rail, the other side. Because the definition of a handrail now means a horizontal or sloping rail intended for grasping by hand for the guidance or support of preventing a fall down the stairs. That, believe it or not, that rope meets all the requirements for a handrail on the stairs, which are what? 30 to 38 above the nose, continuous, and yes, we can have intermediate supports, so meets the requirements, as strange as it seems.
But your open staircase.
Oh, you mean this side?
Yeah.
Yeah, I said it. I'm not talking about the
Yeah,
open
right.
side. I'm talking about the rope.
Sure.
So, lots of new things, you know. How about this one? Does it look code compliant?
We don't know. We don't know the dimensions.
Don't know the dimensions. What do you think is the most common write-up by inspectors? What item? I used to do a top 10 list. The purpose of the handout today of that top 20 was to touch on the top 10, but also to what the major changes were. Top 10. Who can tell me what's the most prevalent one that you've ever been gigged on as a fault or a code violation on any house that you've worked on?
Blocking?
Fire blocking, you mean?
Yeah.
That's in the top 10. It's not near the top, though. Stairways are probably the most prevalent, closely followed by what? We've already talked on both of them already today. Exiting. Exiting and stairways are probably the top. Fire blocking's another one. Any of you get the Journal of Light Construction? No? Yeah, you can go on the internet and actually download it. In the recent version of that, and I can pass this around, you guys can take a look at it. They came up with the top 10, but the other article that they had in there was 2 diagrams of fire blocking. And it was excellent diagrams on all the points that, regardless of code, whether it's IRC or UDC, address fire blocking and draft stopping, and they combined it into 2 drawings. So I would suggest that you take a look at that. I was going to put it in here, but I thought, nah, I better make sure that I got their permission to do that, to incorporate it. But the problem with this one was that the landing wasn't deep enough. It was wide enough. The other issue was that it has some irregularities in tread. Because even if this was 36 inches, which is the minimum, we have a dog leg here that doesn't make it. It's not a conventional step, so. Landings, everybody knows landings, backwards and forwards, no big deal. Change about lofts. In the past, the big requirement was that lofts had to be 50% open to the floor below, that they had to, be guarded and so forth. Now they went a step further, and they included, it said that the guard has to be in compliance with 321.04.2, but not by window or half wall guardrail. So that was a change, because in the past we could have a solid wall. As long as it was 36 inches high, we were good to go. Not anymore. So this is allowed. Okay, no problem there. And when do we need a guardrail on a loft? When we have habitable space up there. If we have a storage loft, something like that, we don't even need a guardrail. What's the other thing that gets triggered by lofts? Whether we need a stairway or a ship's ladder or even a vertical ladder. So depending upon the size, you may or may not be able to get by without having a loft there and a guardrail. This wasn't allowed. So if we've got windows up on that loft, it no longer can comply as proper separation of guardrail. So obviously, left, perfectly legitimate, right, no. Notice too, in this particular case, they were able to use a ship's ladder, not a stairway, because there was no bedrooms up there. There was just basically storage, and there was a den. So be careful on lofts. Stairways, we're not going to go through that. Here was a change. Those of you that remember the situation back in 2009, the state wanted you to take and show all of your wall bracing right on the plan. And then, what was it, 2015, Lenny? That they changed it to the sheet?
Well, it was with this code change.
No, that now you have the option of doing either or. So, I think it was 2012, you had to use that 8.5 by 11 form. Well, now they realized that that was such a problematic for builders and inspectors that they went back and they said, well, you can use the compliance worksheet or a legend. So most builders, most inspectors want to see it right on the drawing. It's just easier for everybody. So this was a change in the sense that defining the building sides. And I have a couple of other slides, I think later on in the program about this when we get stronger into it. But it was the first time that they limited what the maximum length of a building side was, and whether or not, if the building was oversized, i.e. over 75 feet long, then you had to break it down into components, which doesn't sound like a big deal, except when you go to components, this wall that they share, and this is a simplified drawing, the amount of bracing that occurs in that wall basically doubles, because you have to get the wall bracing for area A and area B that would be required by that wall. So if you have a conventional design, which was a house with an attached garage, you were getting into problems of being able to do that, so not a good thing. That's what the worksheet looks like. I'm sure you've all seen it. The other thing that happened in chapter 20, which hadn't happened for 10 years, all of the adopted standards that were in the back of chapter 20, 24 adopted standards got updated. And if you look at chapter 20.24, I just put a couple of them in there. The new numbers, there's also this one, and the reason I put that in there, 332.14 is a brand new one for structural concrete in residences. Where do we have structural concrete in residences?
Spank walls, floors, walls and footings.
Poured walls where we exceed the height limitations that are currently in the code as a table. ICFs, other structural design where you've got real things. So finally, they recognize that there is structural concrete in single-family dwellings. So that's a new one that came up.
It's also good, it includes, in a sense, it codifies a lot of just basic methods for concrete work, site prep and that.
Yeah. Now here's one that, if you haven't come across it yet, you will. And the reason I put this particular one in there is that the wood standards all changed. What used to be NDS now is ANSI, AWIC, NDS. Went to 2015. National Design Specifications for Wood Constructions. That's always been there, but it got updated finally to 2015. Unfortunately, they didn't adopt it in its entirety. So, what's the most common solid sawn framing lumber for floors and beams that you use? If you use solid sawn, what's the most common species?
Almost probably SPF.
SPF, yeah. They did not adopt the most recent code for SPF. And I don't know how many of you know it, but in June of 2000, I think it was 11 or 13, I don't remember which, SPF grading totally changed. So the SPF charts that are in the back of the code book are not the most current ones. And if you get into a design situation where you're really stretching to make a distance, you do not want to use the ones that are in the back of the code book because they're wrong.
You know, what I've been using is the scrub calc.
Scrub calc, yeah.
It's the one I got as a 20, I think the 2012 or the 2015
Right,
IRC code.
yep. And they picked up the new SPF. But you know, the ridiculous thing is, and I don't know why they didn't do it, they said they were going to upgrade the current code to do that. Because think of all your pressure treated lumber, southern yellow pine, same thing. That didn't get picked up. So, one of the complaints when I worked for the state was the fact that, you know, you got all these adopted standards, where do I get a copy of them? Well, with the internet, most of them are available online, but there's still some that, yeah, they're available if you want to pay for them. But the state does have all of them on file. You can request a copy or a section of any of them if you need it for verification. So, we made it through chapter 20. 21. Here was probably one of the biggest changes is the fastener schedule, which was in the appendix, which is part of the code, as opposed to the commentary. The appendix portion that has all the fastener charts and tables now have been moved up into the main body of the code. So it makes it a little bit easier. It also takes and eliminates a lot of confusion between builders and inspectors. So here was the biggest change, in my opinion. Remember I said exiting was probably number 1 or number 2 on the list of top 10 violations? This was the first time that the Code Council followed what the IRC did in 2012. Said that a dwelling, regardless of size, up until January of this year, the only dwellings that could have one door were dwellings of less than 400 square feet. Now they said any dwelling of any size, as long as it has the primary required door, i.e. 3 foot wide, 80 inches high door, they could get by with one exit door. So that's a pretty significant change. You still have to have 2 exits, but the secondary exit can be what? Egress window, anywhere you want it, okay? Used to be, you had to have egress windows always on the second floor out of bedrooms, but believe it or not, I've seen some designs where the bedrooms are on the first floor and kitchen, living room areas are on the second floor. Why is that? Because they have a fantastic view off of the second floor, and that's where they want their primary living area. So now it has been changed. It also was clarified about second exits may be via stairway ramps that discharge to grade, or a balcony which complies with subparent 8, or to a deck that complies to deck code and that is no more than 15 feet above grade. That changed from 12 feet to 15 feet, and that's why I highlighted it. So
that's like the jump balcony, like a?
yep. You can-
So then on a third story, if you had bedrooms on a third story, a third floor attic conversion, let's say, so then you could come out with a jump balcony?
Yes.
And have another lower balcony below it to be able to get it just what's above,
Right.
not more than 15 feet?
Right,
Okay.
right. And that's a big change, because before, it used to be even decks or balconies, if they were more than 12 feet above grade, had to have a stairway or ramp. Nobody builds ramps 15 feet in the air, so.
Well, Egyptians would.
So, this was the old diagram that we used to use, where you had, basically one door in. So now, no matter what size it is, the only caveat is that if the bedroom is on that first floor, or bedrooms, they do have to have egress windows out of them, which is not a big deal. Could be sliding doors, could be egress windows, either one. So